Cool guys and gals. I guess we'll get started here since we gotta keep going on a tight schedule here. I'm having some weird audio problems here, so I won't be able to hear any of you guys. I guess you're not allowed to like talk at me anyway. But what's up, Ken? What's up, Isadora? But I think like since we got 20 minutes, what we're gonna do is we're gonna do just a really abbreviated version of this like founder-led selling presentation here. It's normally done in like 45 minutes or 50 minutes. So like we're gonna do the first part of it, and I'm gonna talk fast. Um, but yeah. So thanks everyone for being here today. I hope you guys get some value out of this because it's super foreshortened. If you have questions, you can hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn afterwards. But yeah, let's get the party started. The full version of this presentation, actually here, I'll just like throw this in the chat here. Boom. Cool. So like the full version of the presentation is available on online. There's also a recording of this that's like longer, but most of this is of course based on my book on startup sales called Founding Sales here. So just like really quick about me, my background is as a business generalist founder. I used to be a junior product marketer at VMware. Gosh, I guess at least like 15 years ago right now. I was the founder of a software company called TalentBin, and that's kind of where I went from being the first rep, first sales manager, first VP of sales. We were acquired by Monster in 2014. Seems like eons ago right now, where I was responsible for new product sales there. And so kind of out of that experience, ended up writing a book called Founding Sales on early stage go-to-market and essentially founder-led selling, right? The Bible for founders who are trying to figure out how to sell. And I currently run a software company called Atrium. We make data-driven sales management software that helps managers use data to improve team performance. And also I started the nation's largest, I guess the world's largest sales operations, sales leadership community peer education community called Modern Sales. So I think about sales a little bit, just a bit. And mainly the kind of the purpose of this talk is to talk about like why it's super important for founders to get over this kind of like sales antipathy, right? And kind of fear of sales. And so first we're going to talk about like why it's important to get over that. And then we're going to talk about the right way of kind of going about that in a foreshortened fashion. But the important thing to take away from this is that you as a founder, you need to get your act together when it comes to sales, and get over that kind of like, oh, it's somebody else's job, or I can't do this, and then realize that you can do it and then actually do it. And so just kind of a little bit of context here, it's understandable why founders have a tendency to be like, oh, I don't understand sales, or, I'm afraid of it, or what have you, because like we're kind of trained to be afraid of it or confused by it, whether that's like examples that we're used to from popular culture that are full of like assholes and like slime balls and what have you, to even like personal predilections away from it. Like a lot of founders come, maybe a little bit more introverted than extroverted. That's okay. Some of the best sellers are introverted, and also just like kind of thinking about like, oh yeah, the people who go into sales, those are the people who can't do anything else, or what have you. And so I think an important thing to realize there, and so what this does is this actually leads to like what I like to refer to as kind of like these crappy anti-patterns, where it's like, oh yeah, well, like we just publish documentations, they just buy, right? These API companies do that, or my favorite one, we don't have salespeople. Well, it turns out that that's like largely bullshit. These screenshots are a little bit old here, but these are essentially searches for sales roles in these various companies. At this point, I probably should update these screenshots. It's probably like hundreds and hundreds or like thousands of people at this point. But even the Twilio, Stripes, Squares of the world, they all had salespeople, right? Slack got over their we don't have salespeople in a hot hurry when they realized that they wanted to grow their business. Some of the other anti-patterns that you end up seeing are things like, hey, I'm gonna let somebody else figure it out, right? I'll sprinkle some sales dude on it. And usually, unfortunately, what ends up happening there is that you end up with like a dead VP of sales in 12 months. And usually the reason why is because a scaled VP, like a VP of sales or a sales manager, they're not used to developing a sales motion. They're used to taking a developed sales motion and then repeating it and then scaling it through a bunch of different reps, but not developing the sales motion. And that's essentially what we're going to be doing as founders. We're going to be developing our initial sales motion. And then kind of another anti-pattern here is like, hey, let's just like sell our software to all of our batch mates. And then unfortunately what ends up happening there is people aren't getting utility out of it because they're just like, buying something they don't necessarily need and doing a bunch of like revenue swaps. And that's just going to lead to a bunch of churn. And, and future investors are not going to be excited about like bad churn rates. And so the problem with this is that, and kind of like where this comes from is if you think about where like founders come from, like oftentimes they don't have that sales background, and that's fine, right? But they have the skills to develop the sales motion, right? These are the skills that we're going to build. So these are the skills that founders have, right? Problem identification, fitting technology to a problem space. Oftentimes the skills that are absent are, engaging non-friendly parties, multiple parallelized conversations, aggressively pushing deals forward, things like that. When you think about where sellers come from, their background and their skills are all about persuasion, extroversion, what I like to call multiplexing, high activity, lots of like parallel conversations. But the thing that's often missing there is the critical thinking and problem solving skills that are required for early sales motion development, which essentially is what we're doing, right? In our $0 to $1 million ARR, that's like sales motion development, right? It's not scaling that. And so just to kind of like characterize some implications of going the wrong route here. This is a little Twitter exchange that I had with a founder of this company called Cover, they were doing like, checkout lists or like, bill list checkout for restaurants. It was an interesting idea, right? It was like an Uber-like experience for restaurants. But at the time, the founder was like, hey, look, I don't want to do outbound into restaurants. I don't want to do sales. We find that like inbound and kind of referrals are all that we need. Now, obviously, if you look at the bellwethers of that market, whether it's Yelp or Groupon or like Grubhub or DoorDash or what have you, they all have very robust outbound sales motions there. And lo and behold, the outcome associated this company got acqui-hired, and those other companies that actually had their act together from a robust outbound go-to-market obviously scaled up more substantially. I suppose I should add DoorDash on here as well. And so the good news is that there's actually like a better way of approaching this. Founder-led selling is what I call it. And so an important thing to kind of realize, and this is like borrowed from Eric Ries and Steve Blank, is that when you think about kind of like enterprise value creation over time in a startup, oftentimes we think like, oh, well, like, that's enterprise value is created on a linear basis. And in part, we kind of have this pattern as a result of kind of thinking about public companies where, enterprise value seems like it's created over time. The reality is that in startup land, like we're way down here at the origin, right? We're way at the beginning of time. And instead of it actually being smooth, it's actually these step functions. And so those step functions are what I call business motion inflection points. And so after each step, the value of the business has increased because we do a better job at converting customer value into revenue. And so if you think about like what those steps are, they're actually like very discrete stepwise things, right? So like, one, do we know what problem we're solving? Start out, no, we don't. We got to do a bunch of customer research. Okay, grind. And then boom, now we know what problem we're solving. We have confidence that it's widespread. Boom, value goes up. Oh, okay, well, let's develop the software. Does it actually work? No, it's like crappy and buggy and and it breaks and it doesn't, and unusable and it doesn't deliver value. Grind, 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 grind. Fix, 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 fix it. Ship more features, fix the bugs. Yeah, it does work. People love it. High engagement, high NPS. Right? Okay, great. Now will someone pay for it? No, 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 no. Yes, right. Somebody sold it. Like we sold something to somebody. They're giving us money and they're getting a value back, and they're engaged with it and they're renewing it, right? And so this is essentially the process that we want to bump along. Do we know what problem we're solving? Does it work? Will someone pay? Will many people pay? Can non-founders sell this? Right? Can we build a mini sales team? And so what's cool about this is that some of these steps are higher. Kind of like they unlock non-linear value, right? So as an example, as soon as we can get non-founders to sell something, well, now guess what? We can scale out a bunch of non-founders to sell it. We can hire a bunch of sellers to take that sales motion and parallel and sell it in a parallelized fashion. That's actually that's a big unlock right there. And then once we can run a sales team, that's another really big unlock. And so these are the things that these are the steps that we want to get through here. And so the steps here, and we'll go through just a couple just so you guys can kind of like understand what the framework looks like. They have very specific things that you want to be working on at that point, and they have very specific things that you don't want to be working on at that point, right? So like the first step, for instance, what problem are we solving? This is generally known as customer development, right? So what we want to do here is we're discovering and validating pain points in the market that we can solve with our application of technology. And so the way that this slide is set up, and the same as in the rest of the deck, is there's key activities. We got the people who are going to do it. We got the exit criteria, like how do we know that we're good to go, right? That we're good to progress to the next step. Tools that are used in the anti-pattern. So in this case, in customer development, what we want to do here is we want to engage potential customers and interview them. Right? We want to transcribe those interviews, want to ask them in a structured fashion, do you have this problem? How big of a problem is it? How do you solve it right now? What's unsatisfactory about it, etc. Right? You should be doing this, right? You certainly can't outsource this, although I've heard of some people try to. Yikes! Because you want to just have like wild problem solution space intimacy. The way that you know that you're ready to move on is when you've gotten to the point where you've completed a bunch of these interviews, and now you have a hypothesis of what it is that you need to build in order to build a minimum viable product and impact those solutions, or impact those problems, right? So this is an org chart. It doesn't look like one because it's just like a block right here, but in later slides it looks like an org chart. And so like there are far better resources than me on how to do this. One of my favorites is this article by Michael Sippy in First Round Review called "Get in the Van." It's really fantastic. It talks about ways of doing structured customer interviews, lean startup and startup owner's manual. Lots of people have probably heard about. And then these are some links here, again, available. This is a link to a First Round Review article I wrote on customer advisory panels. And then this is actually a deck that we used for Atrium's customer development interviews in 2016. Jesus Christ, a long time ago, when we did about 150 customer development interviews. Cool. So we'll do two more sections, then we'll move on to Q&A. So the next step is like, hey, look, does this work? Right? Like we went and we delivered a bunch, we built a bunch of features, and now we got to prove it, right? And so what we want to do there is we want to go and we're going to take a couple dozen or so beta customers, and we want to onboard them, implement them, and we got to prove like, hey, look, are the dogs eating the dog food? Do they like it? Are they coming back to it? Right? And so you're going to be really you want to be really in the weeds there, getting those folks set up, seeing what their usage looks like, getting their feedback, etc. and again, this will be an example of like that grind, and it might just keep going and going and going, grind. Generally, that's how that works. It's like, oh man, it's terrible. They hate it. They abandon immediately. But eventually, what will happen is like you prove that your solution positively impacts the KPIs, right? The business pain that that you identified in that customer development process, right? Uh, Probably an anti-pattern here would be this is like where probably the first like temptations of anti-patterns would show up is like would be hiring somebody else to figure this out. Like, oh yeah, like we'll just build it and like we'll throw the product over the wall, like someone else will go to that. Like the more abstraction you have between you and your early customers at this point, it's like, oh, it's the worst, right? Because like, I mean, everyone grew up playing the game of telephone in kindergarten. And so like playing a game of telephone between like business founder, like technical founder, business founder, sales guy or gal, customer success guy or gal, like having abstraction there and like, putting more links into that game of telephone is just like a recipe for disaster. So again, this is going to be something that you want to be doing as the business founder, right? Or like, maybe if you have multiple technical founders, somebody has to wear this, but you really should be the founder doing this stuff. And so these are some of the assets I would recommend there. Cool. So then once we know that we're ready to move on, when the problem is being solved, it's like, oh, okay, value is being created here. This works, right? Now we need to harvest back some of that value, right? We're creating economic value through the removal of business pain, and now we're going to capture some of it ourselves through pricing. They're going to pay us, right? And so this will be the last section that we do here. Maybe we'll do one more, but in this case, what we want to be able to do, and if you've done the previous stages, right, is like we would present an ROI case to the potential customer. Say like, hey, look, this is positively impacting either your KPIs or generally across like dozens of folks. We know if we're outreach, we know, or outreach or Mixmax or sales like a sales engagement solution, we know that this raises customer facing meeting creation rates by 30%. We know that your average selling price is about this. We know that your win rate is about this. Generally speaking, it delivers this much value, and that's why $100 per AE or $100 per SDR per month is a slam dunk for this, right? And so like that, what we're doing there is we're creating our creating our sales motion, right? There we're using sales narrative messaging, a sales deck, etc., in order to deliver that message and drive for that transaction. And so the point at which we know that we're ready to move on here, right, and exit this is like where we have a set of customers who are paying money for this, getting value back, right? Getting value back. It's one thing for people to pay for something and then not get value back because like they're not going to continue to pay for it. They will churn, and they will churn, and they will tell their friends that your product is like no bueno. That's the point at which we want to move on. And so what does move on look like there? And so really what that is like move on at that point means selling more. Because at this point, what we're doing is like, this is an existence proof here. Like, will anyone, like a handful of people pay? But then what we do is we move on to not an existence proof, but now what we're doing is we're doing iterations. And by doing lots of repetitions of this, what we're doing is we're refining our sales motion and using it as an opportunity by doing it ourselves to start documenting what it looks like in order to hand it off to somebody else, right? And eventually those somebody else's, those will be salespeople. And so what we want to do is we just like want to run a lot of repetitions here, right? And so what that'll do, and oftentimes what that looks like is you want to turbocharge yourself. So oftentimes that can mean adding a sales development rep in order to fill your calendar. Alternatively, so as you can see now, we're starting to have abstraction here between lead gen, selling, and success. Whereas previously, like you were doing it all, you were doing the lead gen. Come on, let's click on this. I think Hopin is taking down Chrome here. You were doing lead gen, selling and success. Now we're going to abstract that out and potentially have somebody else do lead gen while you do selling and success. Or alternatively, flip it around the other way. You continue to do lead gen and selling, and then maybe what you do is you toss the customers over the wall to a CS rep. But what we're doing is we're starting to do abstraction and specialization, and through that we can get the beginnings of scale. And then what comes out of this, by doing enough of this, like, you know, by running this repetition like 30 or 50 times, kind of depending on your deal size, like what we're doing is we're like grinding the sharp edges, grinding the sharp edges off of our sales motion, and kind of like figuring out what are all the objections that show up here. Oh, okay, and then these are our responses to it. Oh, okay, great. Let's make sure that we have a slide for each of those. Oh, I wonder if there's an ancillary use case. Let's update our discovery questions. Let's update our, you know, this slide or what have you. And so what ends up happening is like we're kind of like mapping out the decision space and codifying all of that and putting that into like documentation and tooling. Because then what we're going to do, because essentially what we're doing is we're getting the docs. We're kind of like writing the software. We're writing the program of how to sell this thing, right? And we're finding that, and we're making sure that it runs on our local, and it runs on our local in a bug-free capacity. Because then what we're going to do is we're going to abstract it out. And this will be like the last section before we move on to questions here, because the next, like, that's all the founder stuff. And then what ends up happening is now we're going to abstract it out, right? We're going to add a couple of account executives or sellers, right? And we're going to do our damnedest to take that sales motion that has just been developed and all the sharp edges have been rounded off. Not all of them, but like at least the big ones, the really sharp ones, and the materials and what have you. And we're going to prove, in this stage, we're going to prove that somebody else can do this. Right, so I'm going to stop right here because I want to leave like 7 minutes for time, it seems like here. But the deck keeps going. It's in the chat room there for you all. And as noted, like the full presentation is recorded here. But I would recommend the way that this deck is set up is it has the section. It's the same way that my book is set up, where it's like it's set up in a linear fashion, right? So it has the things that you ought to care about at the stage that you're at right here, and like there's not really a reason for you to move on to the later stuff if you're at the earlier part, right? So you're welcome to go ahead and gloss through the rest of the stuff, but in general, what you should be doing as a founder is like focusing on the section that matters for you. Cool. So like. Questions here, just go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A panel here, and I'll get to it. Ken, as more companies try to do product-led, how does this change the seller's journey? I emphasize try. Ken, I feel that you're going to be successful because you have like a good self-skepticism there, which I think is a really important thing. So yeah, product-led, bottoms-up, blah, 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 blah. It's really important. And the thing I would say there, so this is my buddy Lenny. You guys have probably heard of his newsletter before. I call him the professor. Lenny Rachitsky, the professor of startups. So I wrote here, I'll just drop this in the chat. I wrote an article on layering a sales organization onto a bottom-up self-serve product. And I think the answer to you, Ken, is that oops, sorry, wrong thing, guys, my bad. It doesn't really change things. And the reason why is because like product-led, it's an acquisition vector. It's not your business. And I think that there's been some head fakes there. It's kind of related to this stuff. Like the earliest examples of product-led was actually open source software and then developer tools. And but ultimately, if you're going to have success in an organization and scaling up an organization, you're going to have salespeople that are going to be involved in some sort of capacity, especially if it's especially if you're selling to a non-technical audience or it's a thicker use case, right? And so there's actually a lot of examples of like you could like I don't want to like throw shade on Dropbox, but you could make the argument that Dropbox, really squandered a pretty massive market opportunity by virtue of mistaking what essentially was a lead gen vector, right, self-serve, to be their actual product, and their actual business is what I meant to say. And you can kind of see that where, like, Datadog is a world-killing company, and it's not because like they have this like massive self-serve engine, right? Like, people self-serve to try, right, or to have like a baby version of the product, and then they penetrate the organization with salespeople. So what I would recommend is just go ahead and read this article right here, and don't get head faked into thinking like, oh yeah, it's lead gen, it's not the business. But great question, Ken. I think we have time for like one or two other questions here, folks. And Hopin is doing something else as well. Yeah, cool. So I think, so Tiffany has a question here. At what point, customers do you believe the startup should hire their first sales leader? Good question. I think we covered that a little bit here, but just to re-emphasize that, the point at which you're ready, to move on to abstraction, right, is here. And generally speaking, what I recommend is not the hiring of a sales leader per se, but instead the hiring of like sellers. And now, and I don't have a slide on this, but kind of a more nuanced answer there would be, hey, look, if you can find somebody who's like currently a sales manager, like they're not so far from selling that they forgot how to sell, and then they have like potential upside to be a a manager, a potential manager there, then that can be a really great thing. That's kind of like a very kind of rare unicorn of a candidate, if you will. But generally, when you know that you're ready to like bring on those other, like an ancillary account executive or that like really hands-on sales manager, the worst thing you could possibly do is that, like, gray-haired SVP of XYZ, right? That would be like, because it's so long since they've done any selling, that they're probably not going to be ready to do this stuff right here. Cool. So I think we're kind of like, we're good to adjourn here. Like, I think it's time for you guys to move on to your next session. As noted, like, this presentation is available for you guys, and then also it's also recorded right here. My book is available online. You can either buy it as a hardcover, soft cover, I suppose. It's also available at foundingsales.com as hypertext, so you can like read it and search it and so on and so forth. It's really pretty fantastic. We have it like entirely up on a Squarespace page there, so it's pretty fun. And find me on Twitter, find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Kazanjy in the United States, probably the world.